beautiful day
Okay, I'm
begins
going to look
with a
into
beautiful
all these
mindset.
arguments about who is right or
When
who
you
is
wake
wrong
up,
on this
take a
subsidy.
second to think about what
Because
a
all of
privilege
them,
it is
P2B,
to simply
Atiku, and
be
Tinubu, all
alive
made a
and
statement.
healthy.
So I'm going
The moment you
to dive
start
into three of
acting
them
like life
about
is a
this subsidy
blessing,
removal, which is right.
right?
Now, my biggest takeaway is that all the three major candidates previously accepted the basic case for ending petrol subsidy. The real disagreement was over how it should be removed, what should replace it, and what should happen to the money saved. Article's 2026 promise to restore it is therefore a significant change of positions, while Obi's current position is much closer to what he argued in 2023. Article's new position deserves scrutiny, but Tinubu also cannot win this argument merely by saying subsidy removal was necessary. The harder question is whether his argument has delivered the benefit it promised Nigerians in exchange for the enormous sacrifice imposed on them. Here is my full analysis on all the three candidates. Yes, I have looked back at the 2022-2023 campaign record of Atiku, Peter Obi, and Bola Tinubu, as well as their current 2026 positions. The historical record produces a much more interesting picture than the current political argument suggests. The biggest takeaway is this. All right, all the three major candidates previously accepted the base case for ending petrol subsidy. The real disagreement was over how it should be removed, what should replace it, and what should happen to the money saved. Article 2026 promises to restore it is therefore a significant change of positions, while Obi's current position is much closer to what he argued in 2023. Atiku's new position deserves scrutiny also, but Tinubu also cannot win the argument merely by saying subsidy removal was necessary. The harder question is whether his government has delivered the benefit it promised Nigerians in exchange for the enormous sacrifice imposed on them. Okay, now let's talk about the full subsidy. Atiku versus Obi versus Tinubu. Who is right? The 2027 presidential campaign has just reopened one of the Nigeria's most painful economic arguments. Should Nigeria bring back fuel subsidy or should the subsidy remain abolished and the government properly account for and invest the savings? Former Vice President Atiku Abubakar has now promised that if elected in 2027, he will restore petrol subsidy, arguing that Nigeria have suffered enormously from its removal and that the government has failed to demonstrate where the savings went. He has also said that anyone who misappropriate subsidy funds should refund the money. That's according to the Guardian Nigeria. But there is a problem for Atiku. This is not the position he held before the 2023 elections. And P2B has just reminded Nigerians of that fact. Speaking at today's Nigerian Bar Association conference in Port Harcourt, Obi said, I subscribe and I maintain that you need to remove subsidy. But he immediately added the crucial qualifications. Mismanagement of the savings should not be the reasons for restoring subsidy. In his view, the money should instead be transparently invested in areas such as healthcare, education, and other productive sectors. Okay? That's according to People's Gazette. That put Obi much closer to the position he held in 2023. All right? Now, that is where this debate become fascinating. Okay? One, what did Atiku say before 2023? Please follow me, follow me along this narrative. We have to examine all the candidates. What did Atiku say before 2023? This is probably the biggest weakness in Atiku's current argument. In November 2022, while campaigning for president, Atiku said he will remove fuel subsidy completely if elected. That is what he said in 2022, November. He explained that he had, chaired a committee on subsidy removal during the PDP era and said the process had already been undertaken in phases. He described subsidy as a just fraud and promised to remove it completely and channel the money back into the economy. That's also contained in the New Telegraph. And in July 2022, Atiku told Arise News that subsidy removal was inevitably there, although he favored negotiations with organized labor and other stakeholders like CDDs. Atiku did not, I'm trying to organize my thought, okay, and others stakeholders, okay. Now we have some the CDDs, okay. Fact-checking review found that Atiku did not promise removal on his first day in office, but did promise to tackle it within his first 100 days. That's according to CDD fact check. If I'm right, yeah, yes, CDD fact check. So Atiku cannot honestly tell Nigerians, okay, I have always opposed subsidy removal. The historical record does not support that argument. His positions was remove it, but do it gradually, negotiate with the stakeholders, cushion the populations, the populations, and also redirect the money into the economy. That is materially different from his current promise to restore subsidy now. Now, secondly, what did Peter Obi say? Obi's record is actually remarkably consistent on the fundamental questions. In January 2023, Obi said subsidy should go immediately and call the subsidy system an organized crime. That's according to Channels Televisions. In June 2023, after Tinubu announced the removal, Obi again said subsidy should be removed, but strongly criticized the manner in which it was done. His analog was essentially removing the subsidy is like removing a tooth. You can do it, but you don't have to inflict unnecessary pain on the patient. Okay? He argued for relief measures before or alongside the removal and said his manifesto had already set out how he intended to handle subsidy removal. That's according to Channel Televisions. And now in August 2026, Obi is maintaining the same basic positions. Am I making any sense? Please, I stand to be corrected. Okay? Remove the subsidy, but manage the savings properly. That is significant point in Obi's favor. Is a significant point in Obi's favor. He is not suddenly saying because Tinubu removed subsidy and Nigerians suffer, I now support subsidy. Instead, he is saying the policy itself was necessary. The failure was in implementation and management. Okay, so I'm trying to differentiate both who said what and who said what before we start getting into the nitty-gritties. Okay, that is much more economically coherent positions that Obi is. Now, thirdly, what about Tinubu? What about Tinubu? Tinubu's position has been the most consistent of the three. He said on May 29, 2023, fuel subsidy is gone. He then defended the decision repeatedly. In his July 31st, 2023 national broadcast, Tinubu argued that subsidy had outlived its usefulness, cost Nigeria trillions of naira, and diverted resources that could have gone towards public transportations, healthcare, education, housing, and security. That's according to Channel Televisions. I'm quoting the sources. He also argued that the subsidy system benefited smugglers, fraudsters, and a narrow group of powerful interests. And importantly, Tinubu promised Nigerians that the money saved would be redirected to things that would benefit ordinary citizens. He said that within a little over 2 months, the government had already saved more than 1 trillion and that the savings will be used more productively. That's according to Channel Televisions again. All right? So Tinubu's strongest argument is, okay, I did what all the major candidates said needed to be done. All right? But one have flipped the position. And on that particular point, he has a legitimate argument. But here is where Tinubu's argument breaks down. Okay? This is where Tinubu's argument breaks down. Removing subsidy and successfully managing the consequences of removal are two different things. I repeat, removing subsidy and successfully managing the consequences of removal are two different things. Tinubu can win on the argument that subsidy was economically unstable, but that doesn't automatically mean he wins the argument that his government has managed the aftermath well. Reuters reports that the reforms have improved public finances, attracted investment, and strengthened foreign reserves, but have simultaneously produced enormous short-term hardship, with Nigeria facing a severe cost of living crisis. That's according to Reuters. That is the contradiction at the heart of the Tinubu administration. Okay? That is the contradiction at the heart of the Tinubu's administration. The government says we save money. The Nigerian asks, where is the benefit? The government says, okay, revenue have increased. That is what they preach all the time. Revenue has increased. But when Nigeria asks, why am I still poorer? And then the government is going to come back and say, the economy is stabilizing. Proudly that the economy is stabilizing. Then the Nigeria is going to turn around and ask, why can't I no longer afford the things I could afford before? These questions cannot simply be dismissed as opposition propaganda. They are legitimate questions come from the citizens. You made a promise to the citizens and they have every right to ask you those questions. They are not propaganda. They are legitimate questions about distributions, purchasing power, and living standard. Okay? So is Atiku right? Is Atiku right? Partly, Atiku is absolutely justified in asking, okay, where did the subsidy saving go? Okay, that is a legitimate accountability question. Okay, if Nigerians were told we were taking away this subsidy because the money will be redirected into healthcare, education, security, transportation, and economic development, the Nigerians have every right to demand evidence that this happened. And that is why Atiku is partly right. Okay, that is an excellent political argument. But Atiku then jumped from that position. He jumped from that position. In 2026, he jumped from that position. The government mismanaged the savings. Therefore, I will restore subsidy. In 2026, Atiku then jumped from a position he maintained previously, and then the government is now mismanaging the funds, the savings. So therefore, he is going to restore subsidy. And that is where his argument becomes so much weaker. Because mismanagement of subsidy saving does not prove that subsidy itself is the solution. It may prove that government is mismanaging public finances. Those are two different problems. The Atiku case for restoring subsidy, let's digest it properly. Let's examine the Atiku case for restoring subsidy. We should nevertheless take Atiku's argument seriously. There's a legitimate case for temporary or targeted fuel price support. Nigeria is an economy where transportation costs feed directly into food prices. Okay, school expenses. Okay, healthcare. All right. Wages, logistics, and manufacturing. Okay, even some agricultural productions. So when petrol becomes dramatically more expensive, what happened? Virtually everything becomes more expensive too. The cost of those things that in the fuel that has risen will be transferred to the consumers, the end users. Therefore, Atiku can argue, okay, a government exists to protect citizens, not merely to balance spreadsheet. If the removal of subsidy produces enormous social hardship, government has a responsibility to intervene. And if the subsidy savings are being stolen or wasted, why should ordinary Nigerians continue bearing the cost? Yes. Why should ordinary Nigerians continue bearing the cost when the subsidy savings are being wasted or stolen? That is a powerful political argument. All right. Now, there is one problem with restoring it. There is one problem with restoring it. Nigerian historical subsidy system had serious structural problems. The government wasn't simply giving poor Nigerians cheap petrol. The system created opportunities for smuggling, okay, over invoicing, questionable import claims, okay, opaque pricing, all right, something we call arbitrage, okay, the arbitrage in it, and also the political patronage. Not to forget about rent seeking. Even Tinubu 2023 argument was that the subsidy system had become a vehicle through which powerful interests extracted wealth from the state. That's according to channel televisions. All right. So for Atiku himself to make a similar criticism when he was campaigning in 2022, all right, he called subsidy fraudulent and he said he wanted to remove it and redirect the funds into the economy. It's in the Telegraph. Okay. So the question Atiku must answer is, what has fundamentally changed since 2022? What has fundamentally changed since 2022? We need answers. If subsidy was a fraud then, why is it suddenly the solutions now? Am I making any sense? If subsidy was a fraud then, why is it, suddenly the solution now? If the problem was always poor management, shouldn't the solutions be better management rather than, recreating the same system? That is Obi's strongest argument. That is Obi's strongest argument. Now let's look into P2B's position. In my own opinion, or in my own position, P2B's view on this or stand on this is the most economical defensible. Obi's argument today is essentially, don't reverse a necessary structural reform simply because the government failed to manage it properly. I find that more compelling than simply saying, bring the subsidy back. Because Nigerian real problem isn't only on fuel prices. Okay, what happens for the money? To the money? What happens to the money? If subsidy is removed and then the government saves enormous amount of money, Nigeria should be able to see tangible returns. For example, mass public transportation, cheaper healthcare, better schools, all right, agricultural support, okay, rail and mass transit, all right, industrial power supply, and many, many other things that benefit the citizens of Nigeria. And possible some targeted cash transfers to the citizens, low taxes on productive businesses. All these things are benefits that should be accrued to the citizens of Nigeria. Okay? So investment in domestic refinery is also, that is going to be where the money is going to be channeling. That is the bargain Nigerians should be demanding. That is the bargain. All those things that are listed, that is the bargain that Nigerians should demand. And there is a critical difference between subsidy and social protections. We tend to tangle both of them at the same time. No, there is a critical difference between subsidy and social protection. This is where I think Nigerian political debate is often confused. The government does not necessarily need to subsidize petrol itself to protect poor Nigerians. It can subsidize people. For example, instead of selling petrol artificially cheaper to everyone, including wealthy car owners and smugglers, government could use part of the savings to provide targeted transportation subsidies, public buses, school transport, healthcare subsidies, okay, food assistance, okay, direct cash transfers, okay, support for farmers, support for small businesses, okay, that will be far more targeted. That will be far more targeted and make much more reasonable sense. The wealthy Nigerian driving 3 SUVs will no longer receive the same implicit benefit as a poor Nigerian who depend on a public transport. Now, let's look where Tinubu should be challenged. I'm going to drive my argument where Tinubu should be challenged. Tinubu was right that subsidy need reform. I agree with him. But he made a political and social mistake if he believed removing subsidy was the reform. Okay, was removing subsidy was removing subsidy was the only step one. Okay. Now, step two was, what are you going to do with the money? You remove subsidy, that's step one. But what are you going to do with the money? That's step two. Now, step three, how will you protect vulnerable Nigerians during the transition? Those questions are supposed to be answered. Step four, how will you increase domestic refinery? All right. Then step five, how will you reduce transportational costs? I'm challenging Tinubu. Okay. Step six, how will you ensure the savings cannot be diverted? That is the retest. That is the retest. Now, in other hand, this is where Atiku has a strong question. Atiku is asking, where is the money? And Tinubu need to answer with numbers, no speeches. He need to answer with numbers, no speeches, no slogans, not accusation against Atiku. Okay, show Nigerians how much was saved since the subsidy was removed, how much was received. Numbers will speak. How much was received, how much went to the federal government, how much went to the states, okay, how much went to local governments. All right, all these need numbers to convince the citizens that yes, there's savings in the subsidy removal. How much went into debt servicing and how much went into infrastructure? Okay. Also, how much went into palliatives? How much went into some other miscellaneous things that the citizens need, like transportation, healthcare? All right. How much went into all those things? Okay. How much went into education? And then when all these things have been accounted for, how much is remaining? And when all this thing is done, the most important thing is that where is the audited evidence? Where is the audited evidence? After showing the numbers, you need to show the audited evidence. If Tinubu can answer those questions convincingly, his defense becomes dramatically stronger. Now, let's look the attack on Atiku, the Tinubu's attack on Atiku. It's also too easy. He attacked him as soon as Atiku made that statement, he attacked him. If Tinubu comes simply says Atiku want to take Nigeria backward, that is not enough. Because Atiku can respond, you remove subsidy, Nigerians became poorer, where did the savings go? And suddenly the government has to defend its performance. Okay? The government should therefore not spend all its energy attacking Atiku. Okay? It should answer the questions listed. Okay, you should answer the questions. Nigerians deserve answers. Now, also, Atiku attack also on Tinubu has some weakness, and let's examine those weaknesses. Atiku cannot simply campaign on "I will bring subsidy back." He need to explain how much will it cost, what will be the price per liter, what happens when crude oil price rise, what happens when the naira depreciate. Okay, where will the money come from? All these are valid questions. How will how will smuggling be prevented? How will fraudulent subsidy claims be eliminated? All these are valid questions. If you are going to bring the subsidy back, how will the subsidy be audited? Who qualifies? Okay, and for how long? All these are all basic valid questions. If he cannot answer those questions, then his proposal risks becoming an attractive campaign slogan rather than a sustainable economic policy. Time has come when you have to back your speeches with evidence. Now, let me tell you guys my verdict. Who is right? This is my verdict on who is right based on the fundamental economic questions. I'm going to be very partisan. This is my verdict. Who is right based on the fundamental economic questions? Obi has the strongest position. Subsidy removal can be justified, but the savings must be transparently and productively used. So that is why Obi has the strongest position. On the accountability question, Atiku has a very strong argument. On the accountability questions, Atiku has a very strong argument. The government must demonstrate what happened to the savings. On the historical argument, Tinubu has a legitimate point. All three candidates supported the broader idea of subsidy reform or removal before 2023 elections. Obi explicitly supported the removal. Atiku said it was inevitable and promised to eliminate it. Tinubu made it a central reform and removed it immediately. Okay, so I'm built straight to the middle. Now let's go on the current proposal to restore subsidy. What is my stand on the current proposal to restore subsidy? I would not restore the old blanket subsidy. Instead, keep the subsidy abolished. Okay, but radically reform how the savings are managed and use part of those proceeds to directly protect vulnerable Nigerians. That is the position I find most economically defensible. Okay, then the solution I will propose. Okay, these are my solutions that I will propose. Nigeria needs a no waste, no subsidy compact. One, keep the blanket petrol subsidy abolished. Secondly, publish monthly subsidy savings accounts. Every naira saved should be what? Traceable. Thirdly, create a legally protected subsidy savings fund. Its use should be restricted to transport. Okay, you guys have to pay these politicians. They have to pay me for all these ideas I'm proposing to them. Okay, its use should be restricted to what? Transport, healthcare, education, agriculture. Okay, energy. Okay, some palliative assistance, social protections. All right, and some infrastructure expenditure. Okay, and also invest. Okay, aggressively in domestic refinery. Nigeria should not be exporting crude oil and importing the majority of its refined fuel. That cannot be sustainable anymore. All right, build mass public transportation. Build mass public transportation. If petrol prices rise, Nigeria should not be forced to drive expensive private vehicles simply because public transportation is inadequate. Okay. 6, introduce targeted transportation assistance. All right. Help the people who actually need help rather than subsidizing every liter purchased by everybody. And 7, publish audited accounts, not political speeches. publish audited account, not political speeches. Okay? Audited account is very, very key to transparency. And 8, punish subsidy fraud. Anyone who stole from the old system should be prosecuted and made to refund stolen funds where established by due process. And 9, separate petrol pricing from political manipulations. Let the pricing mechanisms become predictable and also transparent. 10th, measure success by Nigerians household. The ultimate question should not be, did government save money? It should be what I call, are Nigerians healthier, more productive, better educated, safer, and more economic secure because of the money government saved? Okay? Now, this is the big political irony. This is the big political irony. There is something almost extraordinary about the current debate. In 2022, Atiku removed subsidy. In 2023, Obi removed subsidy. All right? This is laughable. Atiku removed subsidy. Okay? Tinubu removed subsidy. All right? And then what happened? In 2023, Tinubu removes it. Okay? In 2023, Tinubu removes it. In 2026, Atiku, I'll bring it back. Okay? Obi, no, keep it removed, but manage the money properly. Tinubu, Atiku wants to take Nigerian backwards. Okay? That tells us something. That tells us something. The real 2027 question shouldn't be, okay? The real 2027 question shouldn't be subsidy or no subsidy. It should be, who can manage Nigerians' money honestly and competently? Because subsidy itself is not the whole disease. Subsidy itself is not the whole disease. Waste is. Corruption is. All right? Poor accountability is. Weak institutions are. Okay? Weak institutions are. Low productivity is. Dependence on imported refined petroleum is. Okay? And perhaps most importantly, least I forgot, a government that asks citizens to sacrifice has an obligation to demonstrate where the sacrifice is taking the country to. Tinubu cannot simply say, all right, Tinubu cannot simply say the reform was necessary. He must show Nigerians what the sacrifice produced. Atiku cannot simply say, all right, I will bring the subsidy back. He must explain how he will prevent the same corruption and waste that he previously condemned. And Obi cannot simply say, I will manage the savings better. All right? He must provide Nigerians with a specific, independently measurable mechanism showing exactly where every naira will go. And this is my final positions. Here is my final positions. If I were advising a Nigerian voter, I would say, okay, do not vote based simply on who promises the cheapest petrol. Okay? Do not vote based simply on who promises you the cheapest petrol. Cheap petrol is not necessarily a cheap economy. And expensive petrol is not necessarily a healthy economy. Judge the candidate on the entire chain. Okay? Judge the candidate on the entire chain. Fuel, transport, food, wages, job, production, inflation, household income, public service. If a government can remove subsidy and stimulously make Nigeria, substantially more productive, provide reliable mass transportations, improve healthcare and education, expand domestic refinery, and transparently account for the savings, then subsidy removal can be economical, justified. All right? But if government removes subsidy, collect the savings, increases revenue, and the Nigerians are simply told, be patient, the future will be better, without seeking measurable what? Improvement, then the government has a legitimate accountability problem. Okay? And if Atiku wants to restore subsidy, he must answer the questions that his own 22 campaign rhetoric creates. If subsidy was fraud when you wanted to remove it, why is it now the answer to Nigeria's problem? That is the question I will put to Atiku. Okay? And to Tinubu, I would put an equally difficult question. Okay? If subsidy removal was necessary and saved Nigeria enormous amount of money, where exactly is the measurable dividend of that sacrifice in the life of ordinary Nigerians? And to Obi, you're not exempted. If you believe subsidy should be removed or remain abolished, show Nigerians exactly how your government will prevent the savings from becoming another pool of money vulnerable to corruption. That is the real 2027 debate, not Atiku versus Tinubu, okay? Not Obi versus Atiku, okay? Or not Obi versus Tinubu, not APC versus ADC versus NDC, all right? It is, okay? Subsidy or sustainability, short-term relief or long-term reform, and above all, who can be trusted to manage the money? That is the question Nigerians should be asking. That is the question Nigerians should be asking. Subsidy or sustainability, short-term relief or long-term reform, and above all, who can be trusted to manage the money? That is the question Nigerians should be asking. Friends, I raise my case.